instead of going to every post one by one to work out an agreement to bill those duties and taxes somewhere, there can be a unified system within the UPU software to make that happen.
That's exactly right.
That's game changer. Welcome to the Decoding Cross-Border Ecommerce podcast. And today we've got a special topic. We're going to discuss the UPU, and we brought in a couple fine guests to do that. We've got Kermit McKinney and Jane Collison here, who they are my cohorts here at Zonos, and have worked closely on the UPU project. Kermit, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of some of the experience you've had with the UPU and why you're such an expert on this topic?
I don't know about being an expert, but yes, I'm Kermit McKinney. I am responsible for partnerships here at Zonos. Have had quite a few experiences working with the UPU over the course of the last couple of years. I'm excited to be here to talk about the UPU because I think it's an important entity in the world today as it relates to the movement of post throughout the world. I'll turn the time over to Jane now.
Hi, I'm Jane Collison, and I'm very happy to be here to talk about the Universal Postal Union. That's the UPU. And the UPU is something that Kermit and I have been partners on for the last couple of years. I'm also with Global Trade Partnerships, and this will be a really fun topic.
And Jane, you've been in the supply chain world for how many years?
Oh, goodness, Aaron. I've about 40 years. So I've really, I love logistics, and international has always been the place to be. So learning about post and how mail moves around the world has been a fascinating opportunity for me at this stage.
That's fair. And Kermit, you've also spent a lot of time on is it mainly on the fulfillment and distribution side? What's kind of your background?
Yeah, mainly fulfillment and distribution. And I don't believe you've been in the business for 40 years, Jane, because you don't look old enough to have been in the business for 40 years. But I do, unfortunately. And so, yes, but I have been in the fulfillment industry. I've owned a couple of fulfillment companies, have done quite a bit of work for some of the more popular big box companies that we know of today.
Fantastic. Now, you might notice I did wear an old Halloween shirt that our family dressed up as. I was the father of things. And I figured the UPU is kind of the father of things when it comes to the postal world. So I figured this was fitting today. And I did have my wife had mother of things. My kids had thing 1, thing 2, thing 3, thing 4, thing 5, thing 6. That was back when we only had 6 kids. I got a couple more than that now. But a lot of T-shirts we had to buy that year for Halloween. But before we jump into the UPU, I wanted to ask you a few questions. What travels around the world but stays in one corner?
What?
A stamp.
What?
Oh.
What has more letters than the alphabet? A post office. What starts with E, ends with E, and only contains one letter?
What?
An envelope. These are good, aren't they?
These are good.
Wow. Wow.
All right. One last one. What's a letter carrier's favorite herb?
Come on, Kermit. We've got to get this one.
Favorite herb.
What?
Parsley.
I'm not sure that was the best.
Parsley.
That wasn't good.
Parsley. Okay. All right. Let's jump into the UPU. First off, what is it? You said the Universal Postal Union, is that right, Jane?
Universal Postal Union. So the UPU is a specialized agency of the United Nations, and it's been around since 1874. So this is its 150th year anniversary, which is amazing. But it's designed to help posts with transport of mail around the world. So it's a regulatory body, a negotiating group. And Kermit, what else does the UPU do?
So the UPU, in addition to those things, I want to go back in a little bit more history because I think this is kind of important for folks to know. Mm-hmm. And that is that the Universal Postal Union, in spite of all the world wars that were taking place in the late 1700s, this was an opportunity for countries to come together to define a strategy of how they would deliver mail to each of their different countries, in spite of all the wars that were taking place between most of the countries that were involved in the initial setup of this. this entity that would help regulate the mail. It was established in Bern, Switzerland, because Switzerland has traditionally always been neutral as it relates to the wars of the time.
It's not because it was a great vacation destination.
It wasn't because it was a great vacation destination, for sure. It is a beautiful community, beautiful city. Jane and I have walked that city many times, and it is a beautiful place to visit. But I think because of Switzerland's stance, that was a logical place that actually became later the place where the actual United Nations was also started and founded in the late 40s in Geneva. So it's actually so historically it's a very important place for the foundation of all post operations throughout the world.
And can you just imagine the post getting together probably twice a year in the early times where travel was so incredibly hard to get to Switzerland, and before Zoom? And now the UPU offers in person and in Zoom, so the technology has changed dramatically. And we'll talk a little bit more about how technology now is affecting the clearance of mail and what the UPU is all about. So
what is you touched a little bit on the history of the UPU. Is there hasn't there been some really great advantages to having a unified postal system, even when times are maybe there's war times or other things going on? Is there some different things in history that would be worth talking about today that the UPU has been key in facilitating?
Absolutely. I think that some of the things that we have to recognize is that every country has its own regulations as far as how it wants to distribute and disseminate mail. But when you're talking about bringing together 192 countries from around the world, that presents a problem. It's the herding cats. It's taking a number of different countries and providing a mechanism for them to come together and agree upon standards and policies of how to move mail from one country to another and ensuring the integrity of that delivery process. And I think that's actually been probably the biggest objective of the Universal Postal Union, is providing those policies and regulatory issues to ensure that the integrity of the delivery and movement of mail from country to country.
And they call that freedom of transit. And so this is actually a regulation that the mail has the freedom to get across the globe, so that no individual country can stop mail, that it's allowed to flow freely, and that if you send a letter from the United States to an African nation, that no one can stop it. It has the right to go through. And they also set the post price for international, so that each country is able to send the mail and the receiving country will get its fair due for that transit.
I think that's actually, I'm so glad you touched on that, remuneration. I always get that messed up.
Can you say that 10 times fast?
No, I can't say that 10 times fast. I can barely say it one time. But in this remuneration process, if you go back into the late 1700s, they really didn't have a mechanism set up to pay for the transit of this mail. It was just really countries coming together under a treaty and to saying that I will deliver mail for you to those recipients in our country. And so initially it was just sort of a treaty or agreement between countries to say that we'll just do that. And then later, as it became more prevalent, countries began to say, this is a little bit lopsided, where I'm not actually able to cover my costs for this international transit of mail. And so a broader treaty and a broader agreement had to be put in place to cover the cost of transport for this mail, which was becoming even more costly as we moved into the 1800s.
So was it kind of in the initial days, it was all the costs were covered by they would charge the postage to whoever the person sending the mail was, but all of the posts that were delivering it were just saying, well, you'll deliver mine when I send them to you, and I'll deliver yours when you send them to me. There's no money really exchanging hands.
Right. And so And it was great, except the prevailing countries at the time, which would have been France, Germany, the UK, and the United States of America. It was very much lopsided. That's where the traditional
market.
So they were sending a whole bunch of mail to these small, to these countries that were not sending anything back, and so they were doing a lot of free labor.
Absolutely,
a lopsided amount of free labor.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So they had to correct that, and that's where, let me get this right, remuneration came in. So how does that work exactly?
So the posts came together. These would be the member countries, and we'll talk about how the Universal Postal Union is broken up into several entities. But essentially, they came together under treaty and agreed that they would do it by weight. So they would establish a certain amount of weight that each country was shipping, and for that weight that they were shipping, they would make a contribution to the Universal Postal Union in the form of a monetary compensation that would then be distributed out to the other countries, member countries, for the acceptance and transmission of those parcels and mail letters based on the weight and volume of that business.
I've heard the term terminal dues. Is that tied in with this, or is that something else?
So it's tied in. They're two separate things, but they're related. I'm hogging the mic here. Terminal dues are the contributions that each member country makes as it relates to the estimated volume of business that they do with the UPU. Right now, the United States of America is the largest terminal dues payer in that network. But it's important because there are many of the emerging markets. You spoke to Africa a few minutes ago, where these are not very wealthy nations. And so for them to make an equitable contribution for the amount of business that they consume, or the resources they consume, would be so taxing that it would not be they would not be able to support the mail that's flowing in and out of those countries. And so terminal dues is a way, I think, of leveling the playing field.
Equitable distribution.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it, Jane.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually based on the economics of each of the member countries, right?
Absolutely.
So if I'm understanding, isn't there different levels of, and basically whatever category you fall into based on your country's, is it population or economics? How does that work?
I'm not
exactly?
really sure on that, Aaron. There's so much politics involved and GDP and everything. Kermit, do you have an idea?
I think it really has to it mostly does to do with the volume and weight of the business that they actually send out to each of the various respective countries. So this actually came into play in 2016. This was sort of an opportunity that the United States took under then President Trump, where some of the countries were being treated specifically China.
Yep.
So China was exporting a tremendous amount of goods and services to other countries, but they were considered to be an emerging market at that time. So their terminal dues were very, very low. So they were shipping out massive amounts of product to other countries, which were then being shipped internally to those countries to their recipients, but it wasn't being managed in such a way that there was equitable compensation for that. So as a result, the United States had this like $300 million deficit in 2015. And so the United States came back to the UPU and the member countries and said, this is not equitable, it's not fair, and we need to either raise the rates for these other countries that are shipping out so much volume of business, or we're just going to extricate ourselves out of the Universal Postal Union and we'll just set up private treaties.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge threat.
I remember that. But this is, at one point in time, China was an emerging market.
They were at one time.
So how often do they relook at the terminal dues and adjust as different economies grow and develop? Because I imagine it's a moving target. You don't just set it and forget it.
No.
And I'm sorry, I do not know how frequently they look at that. That is
not frequently enough, according to Donald Trump, though.
Not frequently enough. But I will say that it is typically a topic when Jane and I have been going for the last couple of years to all of the POC and CA meetings, and we'll discuss what those are here in a few minutes, I'm sure. but it is a topic that comes up regularly. How often it is actually addressed formally, I think, is probably every Congress, which is every 4 years. I'm sure there's a discussion about that. But to Jane's point, in the last 2 years, it was addressed in 2016. It was reset in 2018. They actually adjusted the terminal dues. And so it's probably about that time where it'll probably be addressed in the next Congress this next year.
Fantastic. So the UPU, we've talked about, establishes the freedom of movement of the mail.
Freedom of
right?
transit.
Freedom of transit,
within
that's
a
it.
single postal territory.
Okay, so we make sure all the posts are doing their job and all the different countries around the world are allowing the mail to move freely. And then we just discussed the monetary side of it, making sure everyone's being fairly treated and compensated. And then there's another part of it that's also a technology play too, which I don't want to dive into right now. But is there anything else, any other aspects of the UPU that they touch on? Are those kind of the three main?
They also deal, so you think of the Post globally as a community center. So certainly in the United States, we know where our post office is. But if you're in an emerging market or more rural, that postal center is going to be where you go for financial assistance. Maybe it's going to be your gathering place. So there's many areas of the Post that they actually are involved in to help these different markets with emerging and support. There's technology, there's finances, there's just a great community effort involved with these post offices.
I think it'd be helpful if we could just take a minute, maybe have Jane cover the organization of the Universal Postal Union.
That's exactly where I was thinking to go next to, is just there's a lot of things going on. So how do they structure the UPU so that way they can accomplish all of these objectives?
So the Universal Postal Union is designed in 4 different organizations or 4 different parts of that. Zonos is involved because of the consultative committee, and the consultative committee are outside companies that are involved with the Post to help them with technology, some things that maybe the countries themselves do not offer or bring to the table.
So they're not making all these decisions in a vacuum. They're trying to solicit outside help to be able to really, there's a lot changing in the world, especially when it comes to e-commerce. So that's good to hear that they're... That's
right. And opening up the consultative committee to companies like Zonos has been only in the last couple of years. Because it has been a pretty closed organization, but it's needed now to branch out and obtain some of these resources from various partners. There's the Council of Administration. And Kermit, what does the CA do?
So the Council of Administration, which I believe is made up of 48 member countries that provide that governance, they're the policy and regulation part of the UPU.
And legal issues, yes.
And legal issues, exactly. Thank you. And so, for example, when we transport a parcel from one country to another, there's a document that travels with that parcel. We call it a CN22 or a CN23. The actual makeup and structure of that document is something that it gets set through policy. So the Council Administration manages those actual the formal policies and legal relationships between countries. Then, of course, we have the
Postal Operations Council.
Postal Operations Council, which I think is made up of 41 member countries.
And they handle the technical and operational matters. Okay. And then the last one of the 4 is the International Bureau, and they manage the day-to-day operations of the UPU. They're actually UPU employees versus post offices or regulatory bodies.
So it's more of a department within the UPU, just helping the day-to-day things function. And they're enforcing the procedures and legislation that was set
and writing
out
all of the documents and keeping everything organized. And they bring in they have a UPU attorney on staff that sometimes has to help the countries understand what the actual laws are for the Universal Postal Union. And there's quite a few discussions about, is this in the legal framework of the policy of the UPU?
Okay. I need to make sure I'm understanding that. There's the CA, which stood for what again?
Council of Administration.
Council of Administration. They're making a lot of the policy and legal decisions.
Regulatory, administrative, legal.
Okay. Then you had the operations one, which was called what again?
Postal Operations Council, POC.
So they're making a lot of decisions around the logistical, operational side of
technical and operational matters.
Okay, and then there's the Bureau.
International Bureau,
which they're running things. They're the ones that do the ones that do the real
all
work.
the work.
They make it all happen. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so on the administrative side, that's where the consultative committee sits is within the CA, right?
That is correct. And I mentioned that there are 48 countries I think that are part of the CA and 41 that are part of the.
How do you decide which ones are part of those?
Right, and so those are member countries that actually have voting authority. There's 192 countries that are members of the Universal Postal Union, but not all of them are voting membership.
Does it rotate? Who's part of those, or is it? How does that work?
Paid your dues.
Okay.
So you have to be in good standing,
and you have to be a dues payer.
Yes.
And so many of these emerging countries that are just small countries are just not capable of being a paying member. And so consequently, they're just.
Would you say you have to pay to play then?
You got to pay.
Pay to play.
But it's interesting. You can appear and attend these meetings as an observer. And that does allow these countries to still raise their placard and say they wish to make a comment and have it on record, but they just are not able to vote for some of these different regulations.
But really, the UPU is still a huge benefit for them because they would have a very difficult time operating otherwise.
That's exactly right, which leads into probably the next conversation, which is around the Postal Technology Center aspect of the. And
I'm guessing that fits within the operational group. Is that accurate, or is it sit?
They actually sit as their own standalone body. They report to the International Bureau, so they're part of the International Bureau. Because they're not policy and they're not operations as it relates to how postal operators operate. They sit as a body of the International Bureau that provides the technology that are consumed, the services that are consumed by postal operators around the world.
It's described as a suite of tools. So the Postal Technology Center has done all of the technology, and it's vetted and supported, certified, so that these emerging market posts are able to kind of latch in or tie into this already well-supported technology.
Okay.
So they don't have to do it themselves. It's already a network.
Because it wouldn't make much sense for 192 countries to make 192 different technology solutions.
Exactly.
The EPU builds one that anyone can share. And my understanding is not everybody uses all of the UPU tools. Some of them do have their own tools or use something outside of that. But I'm assuming all of them connect with the UPU technologies in some form or fashion.
That's correct, because the transport of that data, what we call big data or the early advanced data that travels with parcels, is all managed through the UPU's technology services. So whether I'm using specific tools that the UPU provides, I'm always going to be transporting that documentation through their network of services, because that's how information is disseminated across countries.
Okay.
And the PTC then, they provide efficiency and quality, but the compliance tools are very important for these various countries.
What are some examples? I've heard some different acronyms, of course, on some of these tools. Some of them deal with communicating with the customs agencies within the country. Some of them are on the labeling side. If I'm not, give me just a quick snippet of a few of the types of technologies they.
Well, the compliance is very important, and compliance, of course, is regulatory. It's customs. It's also now about the security of what's in the box. So countries want to know in advance of the item coming into their airspace or their roads, what's in the box. Is it something that they allow in that country? Is it something that they need to be fearful of, such as, a a bad actor in sending a bomb. No one's going to declare the bomb, but they also might know from, is it a good sender? Is it someone who's denied in receiving the shipment? So all of these are factors now of what's in the box.
Okay.
And part of that technology, we talk about acronyms. So CDS is one of the acronyms of one of the services that the PTC provides to Post, which is their customs declaration system. That is the transport mechanism for the CN22, CN23, and other related types of documents that moves that advanced data that Jane was just speaking about of what's in the box through their network of providers. So that when I'm a receiving post, I have some advance notice of what's coming and what is in that box so that I can either, one, clear it, make sure that the proper amount of customs and duty was calculated, and then thirdly, that it actually is a legitimate package that is not going to be harmful to the recipient.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. So that gives the tools for the receiving post to import, clear, screen, whatever other processes they have in place. And then I believe there's also some software tools they have for the post to help them export and process outbound shipments.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It absolutely goes both ways. So there's, classifying what's in the box. There's restricting product that they don't want in their country, so screening, and then as Kermit mentioned, the landed cost as well. So shall we dive into what landed cost is, or?
Well, we've talked a lot about that. That's your duty and tax and calculations and things like that. What I'd love to dive into, because I think this ties into that and a number of other things. Let's just back up for a sec. I'm assuming the UPU moves really slow. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that in a realistic way, that they're a big organization trying to tackle problems, a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? And they've got problems in front of them they need to tackle. And maybe they're not tackling fast enough. But what are some of the things that are their big initiatives, the big things they're trying to help solve for all of their postal members?
Well, you mentioned that things moving slowly. I think Jane and I have a funny experience that I think would be worthwhile sharing for the audience that may be listening to this, to talk about the speed at which things move at the UPU. So the first time that Jane and I went, which is 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Mm-hmm.
The big topic was some changes that had been started in the 2016 Congress around changing this early advanced data on the CN22.
Okay, so this is probably 2022-ish?
That's right, when we went.
So 6 years prior to that, there was an initiative.
There was an initiative to change the CN22 to incorporate additional data requirements so that they could capture things like the harmonized code and good descriptions, which required the form of the CN22 to be modified. And in this modification process, they were going to call it a CN23. So there was a meeting that was held around 2016 that they wanted to investigate what would be required to make those changes to basically move from a 22 to a 23. And so they did a study on that for 2 years. And they came back and reported on that. The report was they needed to add additional fields to the 22, which would make it so that the 23 would become a more comprehensive set of documents. And then in 2020, that was voted on, and the agreement was that they would actually now move forward with a new group to actually make those suggested changes and present in 2022 a new 2022 CN22 23 that would incorporate all those documented changes. So when Jane and I went, they actually had a huge historical vote, and the vote was to accept the CN22 23 changes that could then facilitate the moving forward with the revisement of those documents. And that historic vote took place in 2022, about 6 years later. And when we just went back this last time, the CN23 has now been fully adopted and is being utilized throughout the world about 8 years after the start of this process to make this change effective. So speed is not something they're known for.
So 2 years just to do some discovery.
Right.
And then another 2 years to kind of
Well, they discuss it,
it.
and discuss the costs and what the ramifications are, because parcels are only so big, right? And so you can't have great big pieces of paper like the commercial invoice. The CN23 now is the half-size piece of paper. That's a very dramatic change from the little sticker.
Yeah.
So posts do change, and I've noticed that the harmonized code is now on the label, and it's quite dramatic.
Which is great. Now, obviously, the timeline, if this was done in a private organization, would have been about 6 months instead of 6 years, right?
Right.
But part of that is a lot of these members that are voting on and making these discussions, how many of them also have a day job outside of the UPU?
Oh, all of them. Well, all of them, because they're all part of some, their own part of either their regulatory, they're with their country, they're part of the regulatory body of their country, or they are part of their post office administration. So they all have a separate job. And then they travel to Bern 2 or more times a year, if not via Zoom. But it's quite a time-consuming role. And people will be the representative of their country to the UPU for life. We have people who've retired after 30 years of attending the UPU. So they
not
really...
40 years.
No,
not 40 years.
Thank you. I don't know where that came from. It's not 40 years.
But Jane is right. These are committed individuals to this cause. And it's really important because the history, so Jane and I unfortunately don't have that longevity of history that we're building today. And so we'll be much more adept at being able to understand and be more effective in the next 5 to 10 years that we participate here in the UPU than we have been the last couple of years, because it just takes a lot of time to navigate the complexities of how these postal organizations interoperate with each other and as a body.
Well, I think it's great that, going back to the consultative committee, they're soliciting help from outside to try to understand what the current happenings are in the industry, to make sure they're making the best current decisions and not making decisions that were relevant 10 years ago, right? Just because the process took 10 years and now they're 10 years behind still.
Right. And Aaron, I'd like to go back to, what you said, bringing that all together, is that the consultative committee was involved in some of these early discussions about needing to open up, because with the CN22-23 redesign, this really came about because it's been a good 10, 15 years that the ICS 1, ICS 2, so International Security something,
No,
ICS 2,
another acronym.
International
It's all
Security,
about security though, right? And data.
Committee. So there had been a bad event, and I think it was about 2002, where there was actual bombs placed in some printers that were transiting from some country going through Europe. And then while in the air, the European destination country discovered, actually through some communication, that there was a contraband, a bomb on this plane. And so it stopped European airspace for a few days. I remember this quite well. And so after that, the European Committee decided they needed to know what is in that package, what's in that parcel. So before it gets to their countries, before it transits their nations, that they can say they'll accept entry. So ICS-2 really has been a phased-in approach ever since then. And now here we are in 2023, that you have to have good descriptions. You have to know who it's from, where it's going to, what's in the box. And actually the harmonized code, which we haven't discussed much about, but it's can be a 6 to 10 digit number that is a numerical representation of actually what's in that box. Okay. So Post has been exempt from that. But when September 1st of 2025, a harmonized code has to be on every shipment. This is going to be global because the European Union is going to require it. So it really has to go into effect everywhere.
So they have to respond to legislation that's happening in different parts of the world and make sure that they're complying with that, which is the ICS2 and making sure the proper data is being sent into Europe. So now they have to scramble and take care of that. So that's a good example. What other kind of initiatives do they have right now? If you kind of had the big ones that are a big concern for the Post, what is it right now?
So ICS2 is the huge one. That also helps with IOSS that the UK has put forward as being an internal initiative. But sustainability is a huge thing that is happening right now. There's a tremendous push to help these emerging countries to create sustainability as part of their ongoing initiatives for lowering the carbon footprint, of course, is a big issue. Electric vehicles is a huge issue. Postal lockers, or the ability to minimize the amount of travel for postal delivery trucks and vans, et cetera, to go out into the communities. All these things designed around helping to, again, keep us as green as possible within the postal framework. You've got hundreds of thousands of postal carriers. And if every one of them had a vehicle that was emitting carbon dioxide, then we would have, so reducing that footprint makes a significant impact from the UPU's perspective for these emerging markets. So sustainability is a huge one.
Fantastic. And what about on the competitive landscape? Obviously, mail is on the decline and has been for a while now, but parcels and e-commerce are on the rise, and that's where the money's at. But that's not necessarily how these posts have been operating for really centuries, right? So how big of an impact is the changing of the market having on them?
It's significant.
Yeah.
But the UPU is very aware of that, and so they've made some strides to become more competitive, opening up with some technology and some resources from vendors that are outside of the UPU has been a good contribution. They've also done quite a few studies on what recipients demand, and they want good transit. But they want reliable transit. They want to know that the shipment is going to be delivered by a certain date. So an actual time in transit and a proof of delivery is incredibly important. That's been a big initiative and costly. Now each postal carrier needs to have some sort of scanner so that they can identify when the shipment's been delivered. That was something that Express providers have had for years, and Postal did not provide that, but now they need to be competitive. So that's been an important initiative as
well.
It
seems like they've kind of shifted from a model where they didn't have any competition, sending letters. That was their bread and butter. That business is eroding away quickly.
Yes.
Now they're stepping into a competitive landscape where they're not as feature rich as their competition, and they're scrambling to catch up. Does that sound like an accurate assessment of what we're dealing with?
It is. It's been recently a little bit more exacerbated by the fact that they have been employed to actually provide the last mile carrier services by the express carriers. So this is kind of a bit of a slap in the face, honestly, because now we have a situation where merchants are using express carriers as the first mile and middle mile part of the transit, and they're using postal carriers to do the last mile, and the postal carriers are saying, "Here, I'm basically getting the scraps. Maybe I'm being a little bit too rough here, but I'm getting the scraps from these express carriers to do this last mile delivery. Why am I not managing this from first mile to last mile?" And the track and trace was a huge component of why they didn't have that business to begin with. Now they've deployed services through the PTC to do track and trace so they can do the entire scope. And the last piece that they needed was the ability to manage all the early advanced data. And that's been the most recent initiative that the PTC has put forward to be able to have that.
And when you say also that, although well-intended, the terminal dues and some of the monetary agreements that they have can actually hinder the ability for them to compete with some of the costs that their competition has. Is that another accurate assessment?
That's true. And so that's why many of these countries, especially the larger countries, have established treaties with other countries outside of the scope of the Universal Postal Union to basically put forward a different cost structure to make it more economical for post-to-post delivery of goods and services. So yeah, I think that's actually
the other interesting trend that you see out there is a number of these posts. They operate like their own small business. They're trying to, they don't want to bleed money. They're trying to make money and stay solvent. And we've seen a number of them branch out outside the postal stream and create their own commercially cleared products where they can go compete head to head in the e-commerce space, and have had quite a bit of success doing that. Yeah. And I'm assuming now the UPU is looking at this going, okay, we need to give the tools and the resources to all the posts to be able to be competitive. And so what, we've talked about a number of the issues they're solving. What are some of the things they're doing right now to make that happen?
I'll jump in. Okay. So as we look at sort of from let's just take the African nations, these emerging markets. So they have actually created some programs for these emerging markets to provide them with technology. So they have the ability to do track and trace, the ability to ship goods and services outside of their countries to other larger market countries. This provides a couple of unique opportunities. So there's a story that I probably don't have all the right facts for, but suffice to say there are a number of these African nations where there have been initiatives inside those nations to promote the creation of e-commerce businesses for these underprivileged communities, so that these organizations can create goods and services that they want to sell outside of those countries. And now they have the technology to actually provide the ability to actually create this package, ship the package through the countries at a reduced cost, so that they can actually be very cost competitive in the marketplace with the Amazons of the world, which provides a whole new set of income stream into these younger emerging markets, so that they have a way to bring new revenue into these countries, which previously could not have existed.
There's, I think the stat is 30% of the world does not have the internet. So there are micro business owners that will go into the post office to use the internet, set up a website so that they can sell their product. And then the posts are helping these small businesses get into the global economy. That is a tremendous resource that posts provide.
That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And
just one more thing. Mm-hmm. And post financial services is another aspect of all of this. We take, in the United States, we can go to a big box like a Walmart, or we can go into a post office. We can send a MoneyGram to another recipient, either in another country or another part of the United States, and we take it for granted that we can actually move money fairly easily. But outside of the United States and some of the larger countries, the movement of money to another recipient is not an easy process. So one of the more important aspects of the Universal Postal Union is they provide a post-financial services tool. So now you can go into any post office anywhere in the world and actually send money to a family member or another recipient somewhere else in the world, and that's completely facilitated through the Universal Postal Union. That was a huge boon for these emerging markets to be able to receive money and send money in a way that was safe and effective. Mm-hmm.
And we've the UPU has also contracted Zonos for some services to help its member states, right? So can you talk a little bit about the recent contract that was put in place where Zonos will be able to help with some things?
Great.
Absolutely. So the Universal Postal Union is part of this competitive nature to be able to compete with these express carriers in the movement of parcels throughout the world. needed to have the ability to provide to its member nations a suite of tools that would allow them to provide compliance initiatives like HS classifications, like Jane was
Customs
mentioning.
clearance. The terminal dues has to also pay for the customs clearance, which is very expensive. So the UPU needed to provide a streamlined way to send that data to the destination country.
Exactly. We also, the other tools were making sure, you mentioned the bomb that was on the flight, looking at who the sending and receiving parties are to confirm that they're not on some watch list in some country. So being able to look at whether those parties are safe parties to have been shipping or receiving those goods and services. The items themselves that are in the packaging, making sure that they're not prohibited or restricted to be sent into that country. Lithium batteries coming into the United Kingdom would be an example of that. So they needed to have a suite of tools that they could provide to member countries, and especially these emerging market countries, to be able to provide those services so that they can be in compliance and conformance with all regulatory bodies across the world.
And this is all being delivered through the software that is managed by the PTC, right?
So the PTC is providing the software, but in order to provide that all those compliance aspects, they needed to engage a third party company that had that suite of tools that they could then pull that data from that third party company to provide to its member nations. And yes, Zonos was the entity that was selected to provide all of those tools.
That's exciting. That's awesome. And I believe there's also the HS classification tool that would be part of that, and land of cost calculations
land
in
of
there
cost
as well.
calculations.
And then the screening and restrictions,
that's
right?
correct. That is absolutely
That's
correct.
very exciting. I know you were heavily involved in that, Kermit, and Jane, you were as well. And that's really exciting. Look, I'm wearing a t-shirt and a hat on this podcast talking about this, right? We love tech. We love helping and staying on the forefront of things. So it's really exciting to have a company like Zonos involved with the UPU, because hopefully it can turn into some really big wins for all the members that are using it. Is there any other, as we kind of look to the current, we kind of talked a lot about the current landscape. What about the future landscape of things and initiatives that they'd like to tackle?
I'll mention the business to business to consumer, or B to B to C. So it's capitalizing on this new network of regional providers that are going to consolidate in one country, send it as business parcels to a destination country, and then clear together and then inject into the postal network for final delivery. But it can also be post on the front end now too. So they're trying to organize the post to take care of some of these new e-commerce tools. And
I'm assuming the idea there is increase efficiency and lower costs, and create just better service offerings to be more competitive. That's
absolutely. I think we take it for granted. So one of the advantages that the express carriers have had over post is the ability to collect and pay the duties and taxes on a shipment either at time of delivery or even ahead of delivery, which was something that they were uniquely qualified to do because of the vast network that they established for providing brokerage-type services. The postal operators, who work hand in hand with customs every day, did not have the facility or the software tools to actually provide those types of services until today. Thanks to the engagement that they have with Zonos, one of the advantages that Post will have the ability to do now is they'll have the ability to calculate what those taxes are at time that the package is actually being shipped, and then pay those duties and taxes ahead of delivery so that the delivery experience becomes seamless for that recipient. That recipient isn't going to receive a package and have to pay those duties and taxes at time of delivery. That will all happen prior to that package arriving in there.
And that's we talked about that we actually had a podcast previous to this. It was specifically about postal DDP and why it's so difficult for Post to be able to create a DDP offering, because they need that to be competitive in e-commerce.
Absolutely.
The ability to collect duty and tax at checkout the demand for that is going up, not down. Buyers are expecting it more and more. And so that means the merchants, the shippers, are going to contract services that offer it so they can meet the demands of their customers. And if the posts don't have that, they're not going to be selected.
That's correct.
And so, but one of the challenges is the fragmented relationships that exist when the package gets it, because the postal is normally the stream works. I hand it off to you, and the postage is taken care of through agreements and things, but the duty and taxes get assessed after it clears, and the only mechanism is to collect it from the recipient. And now you have to have all the tools and mechanisms in place to bill that to some other party if you want to create a DDP offering. But that's a difficult ask in the postal world versus Express World and consolidators. They control the whole network, so they can control the flow of that money. But what it sounds like now is, instead of going to every post one by one to work out an agreement to bill those duties and taxes somewhere, there can be a unified system within the UPU software to make that happen.
That's exactly right.
That's game changer.
That is absolutely a game changer. And this is why the PTC has made such a significant investment in technology as of late, because they recognize that the only way they can maintain their competitive nature and be on the forefront of the leading or bleeding edge of this technology is to actually go out and contract and provide those services globally to their constituents in a way that actually harmonizes all the posts together around a suite of services that has not previously existed.
That's fantastic. That's really exciting because I know there's been some initiatives like with the IPC and others that are regional within certain groups of posts. But now we're talking about getting inside the actual UPU software, which is going to make this available to so many more countries. That's phenomenal. Anything else that we'd want to touch on that we think could be relevant for the postal world? Talking about the UPU or anything that's exciting you guys? Or do you think we've kind of covered it all?
I think we've covered it, but I do want to add that working with the UPU has been an honor, truly. And I as this goes out into the world, I do admire everything that they're attempting to do to unify the world. I mean, there are over 600,000 individual post office and providers. They have a tremendous service, and I can't imagine a globe without the post office. So I'm very excited to be working with them in this capacity.
I couldn't agree more. Jane and I have spent the last, again, 2.5 years participating in various UPU meetings. And I will say something that I think is important, is that the men and women that are part of the postal industry are the most dedicated people I've ever seen in my life. They're dedicated to their country. They're dedicated to the postal operations. They're dedicated to the consumer. They're dedicated to each other. We've got a terrible war that's taking place between Russia and Ukraine, and yet every time we meet, that the topic of this comes up in a way to in solidarity to make sure that the postal workers on both sides of this conflict are cared for and are addressed properly and respectfully, because again, no matter what's happening in the world today, everyone expects their mail and their parcels to be delivered in whatever conflict may be taking place. And these good postal workers put their lives on the line many times every day to provide that service. And it's actually, it's a daunting task in some of these environments, but it is something that I think goes undervalued by most of us. We just sort of expect this to happen, but it actually comes at a cost many times. So.
No, that's fantastic, and I do agree. We've talked a lot about some of the struggles and hurdles they have to overcome to be competitive in a changing landscape by the nature of how they operate. However, they do have some very unique advantages that I think can only be had within the postal community, and so it's also really exciting to think about the potential they have as they overcome the challenges and as they adapt and evolve. They have the ability to be extremely competitive and extremely relevant for a long time to come.
Absolutely, they do.
There's no other organization that has the density, the economies of scale. With this new technology, I think they're just going to be really become competitive.
Yeah.
That's
Change
fantastic.
the landscape.
That's fantastic. Well, I very much appreciate your time today. This has been enlightening. This has been a lot of fun. And thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'd like to do it again.
Let's do it.
Okay. Awesome.